The first person who showed up at my door that night wasn't anyone I would have predicted. Not my roommate, who'd moved to Calgary 6 months earlier and still texted me every Sunday like he lived next door. Not my friend from university, who always said, "Let me know if you need anything," the way people say it when they're hoping you won't. Not even my mother, who I'd called twice and both times got voicemail. The first person who knocked was Tessa Kowalski, and I stood there in the hallway of my apartment holding a letter from my employer like it was evidence of something, trying to figure out why of all the people I knew, it was her. Tessa worked 2 floors above me at the same downtown Toronto office. Different department, different manager, same elevator, we'd somehow always ended up sharing at the worst possible moments. She was a project coordinator. I worked in data analysis. We'd met because she'd emailed my entire team once asking for Q3 numbers she needed by end of day, and I'd replied all saying the deadline was unreasonable. She'd replied back, just to me, saying the deadline wasn't her idea, and maybe I could take it up with someone who had the authority to change it. I didn't have a good response to that, so I just sent the numbers. After that, we kept crossing paths. The elevator, obviously, the Tim Hortons on King Street, where half the building got coffee because the machine in the break room was broken for 3 weeks, and nobody could agree whose budget covered fixing it. The Wednesday afternoon fire drills that always happened at exactly the wrong time. Small friction that turned into small conversation that turned into something I could only describe as competitive friendliness. We disagreed about almost everything. Whether hybrid work was actually productive, whether the Leafs had any shot that season, whether a window seat at a restaurant was worth waiting 20 minutes for. I always said no. She always said, obviously yes, and looked at me like I'd said something philosophically wrong. I don't know exactly when I started looking forward to running into her. Probably around the same time I stopped pretending I didn't. Then came March, and March changed everything. The company had been making noise about restructuring since January. The kind of quiet noise that senior leadership made at all-hands meetings while using words like optimization and streamlining and positioning for future growth, which everyone understood meant something was coming, but nobody knew what. By February, 2 teams had been quietly merged. By early March, the rumors got specific. By the second Friday of March, I was sitting across from my manager in HR in a meeting I hadn't been scheduled for, and they were using the phrase role elimination in a tone that was trying very hard to be kind. They gave me 8 weeks of severance, a reference letter, a number for an employee assistance program, and a folder with information about filing for EI through Service Canada. The HR rep explained the steps clearly and efficiently, the way someone does when they've had this conversation many times and have learned that being clear is more merciful than being soft. I nodded through most of it. I signed what I needed to sign. I took the folder. Then I went to my desk, sat down, and stared at my screen for about 4 minutes without doing anything. Around me, the office continued. Keyboards, conversations, the sound of someone microwaving something in the break room down the hall. None of it registered. I felt like I was watching it through glass. I packed my personal things into a box that was slightly too big for what I had, which made it worse somehow. The empty space in the box felt embarrassing. I took the stairs instead of the elevator because I didn't want to stand still long enough to think. I got home, put the box down on my kitchen floor, and sat on the couch without taking off my coat. Just sat there with the folder in my lap. An hour later, I texted Tessa. Not because I'd planned to. Not because she was the obvious choice. I just did it before I thought about it. Lost my job today. Role elimination. Didn't see it coming. I don't know why I sent it to her. She wasn't my closest friend. She was the person I argued with about window seats. She replied in under 2 minutes. Which floor are you on? I didn't understand the question at first. Then I realized she meant the building. She was still at the office. I'm home. I typed back. A pause. Then, address? I told her that wasn't necessary. She sent back a single period, which somehow communicated more than a paragraph would have. 25 minutes later, someone knocked on my door. Tessa was standing in the hallway in her work coat with a bag from the Vietnamese place on Queen Street that I'd mentioned once, exactly once, 6 weeks ago when we'd argued about whether pho counted as winter food. She had apparently remembered. I had apparently not expected that. I looked at her. She looked at me. You didn't have to come, I said. She walked past me into the apartment like I hadn't spoken. Set the bag on the kitchen table. Looked at the box on the floor, then back at me. Do you want to talk first or eat first? I wasn't expecting company. That's not what I asked. I stood in my own doorway for a second, still in my coat, looking at a person who had apparently decided that my not asking for help was irrelevant information. Then I closed the door and sat down at the table. Eat first, I said. Good call. She didn't ask me to explain anything while we ate. She talked, actually. About her afternoon, about a meeting that had gone sideways, about the fact that she'd nearly gotten on the wrong streetcar on the way over because she'd been distracted. Normal things. The kind of conversation that doesn't demand anything from the person who's barely holding it together. I ate most of my pho without realizing I was hungry. The warmth of it was the first thing that had felt normal since that morning. When I finally ran out of ways to avoid it, I told her what had happened. Not cleanly. I skipped around, went back, repeated myself. 8 weeks of severance, EI application, the box on the floor. The way my manager had looked at me like she felt genuinely bad, which almost made it worse because it meant there was nobody to be angry at. Tessa listened. She didn't try to fix it, didn't tell me I'd find something better, that this happened to everyone, that I should see it as an opportunity. She just let me get through it. And when I finally ran out of words, she looked at the box on the kitchen floor and said, "That box is way too big for what's in it." I laughed. First time all day. I know, I said. She nodded once, then looked at me. What do you need to do first? Like practically. EI application, updating the resume, whatever. What's the actual first step? That was Tessa. Not let me know if you need anything. Not you'll be okay. Just what's the first step? And are we doing it? Over the next few weeks, I found out what job searching felt like in 2024 in a market that wasn't being kind to mid-level analysts. I applied to things that seemed like a good fit and heard nothing. I applied to things that seemed like a stretch and heard nothing. I had 2 phone screens that went well and then went nowhere. I had a third interview, an actual in-person one at an office near Bloor and Yonge that I thought had gone well enough to feel hopeful about, and then received a very polite email 4 days later, thanking me for my time. Severance ran out after 8 weeks. EI kicked in but covered about 60% of what I'd been making, which in Toronto meant recalculating basically everything. I deferred one bill, moved another. Did the math on my TFSA and didn't like the answer. Stopped eating out except once a week when I let myself, because I'd read somewhere that cutting every small thing made the whole process feel more like punishment than problem solving. I stopped sleeping well. Not dramatically, just the low-grade way where you're tired, but your brain won't settle. And 3 in the morning starts to feel like a reasonable time to be awake, reviewing your LinkedIn profile and wondering if the summary section was the problem. Tessa noticed before I said anything, the same way she'd noticed other things about me before I named them. One Tuesday in April, she showed up with coffee and a folder. "What's that?" I asked. "Resume." I went through it. I looked at her. "I didn't ask you to do that. I know. You were going to, though. I really wasn't." She set the folder on the table and sat down across from me. "You've been applying for 7 weeks. Nothing's converting past the first screen. The resume isn't bad, but the summary reads like a job description instead of like a person. And you've buried the project impact numbers under the technical skills section, which is where no one looks first." I stared at the folder, then at her. "You went through my resume, you emailed it to me to look at, and then said, 'Never mind, don't worry about it.' That means don't worry about it. That means you were embarrassed to ask." She held my gaze. I looked at it anyway. I should have been annoyed. I wasn't, which was its own kind of unsettling. I opened the folder. She'd gone through the whole thing in red pen, the old-fashioned way. Moved sections, rewrote the summary, added specific numbers I'd forgotten to include. It looked more like me than the version I'd been sending out. "When did you do this?" I asked. "Last night." "You have a job, Tessa. And a red pen. Finish your coffee, Cincy." Got a call back the following Thursday. But here's the thing about job searching. The part nobody tells you. It isn't just tiring because of the rejection. It's tiring because of the waiting. The space between sending something out and hearing back fills up with the worst version of your own thinking. I had a lot of space that spring. A lot of very quiet mornings in a 1-bedroom apartment in a city that was moving at full speed around me, While I felt like I'd been paused, Tessa kept showing up. Not every day, but consistently enough that I started expecting it. Tuesday evenings, sometimes Saturday mornings. She brought coffee when she came over and argued with me about whatever was easiest. Whether I needed to network more aggressively. Whether I should take a contract role while I waited for something permanent. Whether I was being too selective or not selective enough about which applications were worth the effort. I pushed back every time. She pushed back harder. And somehow that was exactly what I needed because it kept my brain moving when it wanted to stall. There was a Wednesday in May, week 11, where I was in a particularly bad place. Not dramatic bad, just flat. The kind of day where you do the thing you're supposed to do, apply to 2 jobs, make lunch, go for a walk, and feel nothing about any of it. Tessa came over that evening and I was short with her. Not because she'd done anything, just because I was running out of patience with my own situation, and she was the one in the room. She'd been on the phone with a recruiter on my behalf. I'd given her my permission weeks ago to make some calls on my behalf, which had felt like a lot at the time, and when she got off the phone and sat down beside me to tell me what the recruiter had said, I said, "I can handle my own job search." The words landed in a way I hadn't intended. Tessa went quiet. Then she nodded. Okay, that should have felt better. It didn't. The quiet after was worse than the thing I'd said. I looked at the table. That came out wrong. She was still for a second. Then she leaned back and said, "Do you want to know something that's going to be annoying to hear?" Probably not. I'm going to say it anyway. I looked at her. "You're not actually frustrated with me," she said. "You're frustrated because you're good at your job, and the market doesn't care about that right now, and that's an unfair situation with no specific person to blame. So you're occasionally aiming it at me instead of at yourself. Which is fine. Just don't do it, and then tell me that's independence." I didn't say anything. She looked tired. I noticed it then, properly. She was still going to work every day, managing her own deadlines, and spending her evenings sitting in my apartment reading job listings and making phone calls and eating pho on my kitchen floor. Nobody asked her to do any of that. "Why are you still doing this?" I asked. She looked at me the same way she had the first time I'd said something she found genuinely baffling. "What do you mean, this? All of it. You have your own life." Tessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the even tone she used when she was being completely straightforward, "Because I'm not doing it for the thanks. I'm doing it because you matter to me, and pretending otherwise so you can feel like you're not asking for too much seemed like a waste of both our time." I sat with that. "That's more than friendship," I said. She held my gaze for a second. "Yeah, it is. No performance, no hedging. Just the fact, laid out like something that had been true for a while and didn't need to be dramatic about it." I probably should have said something eloquent. What actually came out was, "I look unemployed." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "You look like someone who's been dealing with something genuinely hard for 3 months. That's not the same thing." She reached over and put her hand on the table near mine. I turned my hand over and held hers. That was the beginning. Not the layoff, not the severance letter. That. Things didn't resolve cleanly. After that, they never do. The job search kept going. I had 2 more rejections in June, one of which was for a role I genuinely wanted, and the afternoon I got that email I was not good company. Tessa came over anyway. She didn't pretend the rejection wasn't hard. She ordered pizza and let me talk through it. And then, around 10 at night, gently pointed out that I'd already identified the specific thing I would have done differently in the final interview, which meant I actually had something concrete to work with, which meant I wasn't. I was adjusting. That was the thing about Tessa. She didn't soften things into meaninglessness. She just helped me see what was actually there. In early July, I got a call for a role I'd applied to back in May and half forgotten about. A senior analyst position at a mid-sized logistics firm with an office near Leslieville. 2 rounds of interviews. A skills assessment. A reference check where I found out afterward that Tessa had been one of the references I'd listed and they'd called her, and she'd apparently said something good enough that they'd mentioned it to me in the offer call. I called her the moment I hung up. She picked up on the second ring. "I got it," I said, a pause. Then, quieter, "Yeah. She made a sound I'd never heard from her before, just this brief, unguarded exhale, like she'd been holding something and could finally put it down. "Tessa, I'm fine, she said. That's great. That's really good. When do you start? I told her. Then I stood in my kitchen, phone against my ear, thinking about every Tuesday evening and Saturday morning, every cup of coffee she'd carried up the stairs, every argument she'd picked on purpose to keep me from going too quiet. You were my reference, I said. You needed one. You didn't tell me you'd said yes to it. You would have told me not to. She was right. I would have. Why didn't you listen to me? I asked. She paused for exactly 1 second. When have I ever listened to you? I started the new job in August. Better compensation than the role I'd lost, slightly longer commute, a team that's solid. The first week was the particular exhaustion of learning everything new at once. New systems, new people, new coffee machine that nobody had mastered the settings on. On the Friday of that first week, Tessa texted me at 5:15. How bad was the coffee? Worse than the one at our old office, I typed back. Which I didn't think was possible. Tragic. You want to get dinner? We went to the Vietnamese place on Queen Street. Same place she'd brought on that fortnight, the night I'd been sitting on my couch in my coat, holding a severance folder, and not knowing what came next. We got a window table, which I'd always said wasn't worth waiting for. It took 11 minutes. Sitting there with the spring still in the air and the city moving past the glass and Tessa across from me arguing about whether I should give the new team 6 weeks or 8 before forming any real opinions about them. I thought about the elevator, the reply all email, all the small frictions that hadn't been friction at all, looking back. They'd been something else. The kind of thing you don't recognize until you're on the other side of it. I survived a stretch of months that I wouldn't want to repeat. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, the person who'd always disagreed with me in elevator banks and Tim Hortons lineups became the one I couldn't imagine not having. A year later, I'm still at the job, still arguing with Tessa about window seats, about hockey, about whether starting a new series at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday is ever a reasonable decision. The difference is that now I walk her to her streetcar stop after, and I know that the worst 4 months of my career were also how I ended up with the clearest thing in my life. If you were in my position, someone showing up for you when you didn't ask and wouldn't stop when you pushed back, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, leave a like, subscribe to Whispered Someday, and I'll see you in the next one.